The first clue wasn't the death certificate. It was the flowers. 3 days after I woke up, a volunteer brought a bouquet into my room. White lilies. The kind people send to funerals. I remember staring at them while rain tapped against the clinic window. Something about them felt wrong. Almost mocking. The volunteer smiled. "Your family sent those." I looked at the card. It wasn't addressed to me. It said, "In loving memory of Victoria Lawson." My stomach turned cold. "Memory?" I asked. The volunteer's expression shifted. A tiny flicker of confusion. Then concern. She left the room without answering. An hour later, the clinic director arrived carrying a folder. I still remember the smell of wet wool from his coat. Outside, the Pacific Ocean crashed against black rocks beneath a gray sky. Inside, my life ended for the second time. He placed the folder on my lap. "Victoria." He hesitated. Then opened it. There it was. State-certified documentation. Death registration. Official seal. My name. My date of birth. My declared date of death. Signed. Filed. Approved. I stared at the paper so long the words stopped looking real. The room felt strangely quiet. Like my ears had gone underwater again. "I don't understand." The director removed his glasses. "Neither do we." "What happens now?" His answer was honest. And terrifying. "Legally, you're not supposed to be here. Most betrayals happen gradually. Mine happened all at once. Over the next week, I learned what my family had done while I was unconscious. My father had assumed emergency control of my company shares. My mother had organized a charity foundation in my name. My brother had somehow gained access to corporate reserve accounts. My sister had moved into my house. Not to protect it. To live there. Every new discovery felt like another wave hitting bruised skin. But one question refused to leave me alone. Why? I wasn't a billionaire. I wasn't famous. I simply owned a successful logistics company I had built over 12 exhausting years. A good company. A profitable company. The kind of company people spend entire careers trying to create. Then I remembered something my grandfather once told me. Greed doesn't measure value. It measures opportunity. And dead people can't object. 3 weeks later I left the clinic. Not because I was fully healed. Because I couldn't afford to stay. The taxi ride back to Portland felt unreal. The city looked exactly the same. Coffee shops. Traffic lights. Street musicians. People arguing over parking spaces. The world had continued perfectly without me. When the driver turned onto my street, my chest tightened. There it was. The house. The place I bought after my company landed its first major contract. I used to sit on that front porch every Sunday morning with coffee and quarterly reports. Now another car occupied the driveway. My sister's car. I stayed inside the taxi. Hidden. Watching. Then the front door opened. And my heart stopped. She stepped outside wearing my engagement ring. The diamond caught sunlight as she laughed into her phone. For a second I actually questioned reality. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe the medication hadn't fully left my system. But then she lifted her hand again. The ring sparkled. My ring. My future. My life. All being worn like borrowed jewelry. The driver glanced at me through the mirror. "You okay?" "No." It was the most honest answer I'd given in months. I could have walked to the front door. I could have screamed. Demanded answers. Created a scene. Part of me wanted exactly that. But something stopped me. Maybe survival instinct. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the realization that nobody had accidentally made these choices. Every signature. Every transfer. Every legal filing. Required planning. Intent. Time. They hadn't panicked. They had prepared. And people who prepare for betrayal usually prepare for confrontation too. If I knocked on that door, I wouldn't be returning home. I'd be walking directly into their version of the story. So I stayed silent. The taxi drove away. And for the first time since the accident, I stopped thinking like a victim. The following month was ugly. Not cinematic. Not inspiring. Just ugly. I rented a small furnished apartment above a laundromat. The walls vibrated every time industrial dryers started. The elevator smelled like bleach and old newspapers. I bought second-hand clothes. Used a different last name. Paid cash whenever possible. At night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. Because I couldn't stop thinking. Who had filed the paperwork? Who approved the transfers? Who benefited most? Questions became routines. Routines became plans. Plans became purpose. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, while reviewing old encrypted backups on a forgotten laptop, I discovered something they had missed. A crypto wallet. Not enormous. Not life-changing. But significant. A private reserve account I had created years earlier during a cybersecurity audit. Nobody knew about it. Not my lawyers. Not my accountant. Not even my fiancé. I stared at the balance. And for the first time in months, I smiled. It wasn't enough to rebuild my old life. But it was enough to build a new one. An invisible one. People imagine revenge begins with anger. Mine began with paperwork. Company registrations. Private contracts. Anonymous holding structures. Months passed. The woman named Victoria Lawson remained legally dead. But another identity slowly came to life. Carefully. Quietly. Patiently. I learned something important during that period. When people think they've won, they stop looking behind them. My family believed they had escaped consequences. They weren't watching for threats. They were spending money. Hosting galas. Giving interviews. Living comfortably inside a future built from stolen foundations. And while they celebrated, I started building something much more dangerous. A company. A strategy. A doorway back into their world. Not as a daughter. Not as an heir. Not as a victim. As an investor. As someone they would eventually invite inside themselves. Someone they would trust. Someone they would desperately need. What I didn't know yet was that my brother had already begun destroying the empire they stole from me. And the first crack was about to appear. A crack that would give me the opening I'd been waiting for. Forever. If you've ever watched someone take credit for a life you built with your own hands, tell me in the comments, would you walk away, or would you come back and make them face the truth? The first crack appeared on a Thursday morning. I was sitting in a small coffee shop overlooking the Willamette River when an article flashed across my laptop screen. Lawson Holdings delays quarterly report. To most people, it was boring corporate news. To me, it was a warning siren. My company had never missed a reporting deadline. Not once. 12 years of growth, acquisitions, and brutal competition had taught me one thing. Healthy companies don't hide numbers. Desperate companies do. I read the article 3 times. Then I smiled. Because for the first time since my death, something wasn't going according to their plan. Over the next few weeks, I started digging. Carefully. Quietly. The way someone studies a house before deciding which window is unlocked. Public filings. Supplier complaints. Vendor payment delays. Court records. Everything told the same story. Cash was disappearing. Fast. The company I had spent 12 years building was bleeding from a dozen different wounds. At first I blamed my father. He had always loved power more than management. Then I found something interesting. A pattern. Large withdrawals. Strange transfers. Private gambling debts hidden through shell accounts. Every trail led to one person. My brother, Ethan. The golden child. The family favorite. The man who once lost $30,000 in a single weekend and laughed about it at dinner. Only now the numbers weren't thousands. They were millions. I leaned back in my chair. Outside, rain slid down the cafe windows. Inside, a strange mixture of satisfaction and grief settled over me. Because despite everything they had done, watching my company suffer still hurt. It felt like seeing someone vandalize a house I built brick by brick. 3 months later, Apex Capital officially existed. Not publicly. Not loudly. Just enough. Enough licenses. Enough legal structure. Enough credibility. The company had no website worth mentioning. No media presence. No flashy announcements. Just quiet money and carefully designed paperwork. Invisible by choice. The perfect predator doesn't announce itself. It waits. That was when I met Charles Bennett. The front man. The face. The actor. Technically, he had once been a real actor. Years earlier, he had appeared in regional television commercials and corporate training videos. Now he was 68 years old, charming, silver-haired, and impossible to dislike. People trusted him within minutes. I trusted him within 20. Not because he was convincing. Because he was honest. The first thing he said during our meeting was, "This sounds insane." It is. And dangerous. Very. He laughed. Then took another sip of coffee. "What exactly do you need from me?" "A role." His eyebrow lifted. "A role?" I slid a folder across the table. Inside was the Apex Capital proposal. Corporate structure. Ownership layers. Investment strategy. Everything. Charles spent nearly 40 minutes reading. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. The amusement was gone. Now he looked impressed. "You've thought this through. For 6 months. And they have no idea?" "No." He closed the folder. Then smiled. "Well, Victoria." He tapped the papers. "Looks like I'm about to become very rich." The first meeting happened 2 weeks later. Lawson Holdings headquarters. The building I had personally chosen. The lobby still had the same marble flooring. The same lighting fixtures. The same reception desk. Everything looked familiar. Everything felt foreign. I entered carrying Charles's briefcase. Officially, I was his executive assistant. An employee nobody noticed. Exactly where I wanted to be. The elevator ride nearly broke me. Not because I was afraid. Because the walls reflected my own face. A face my family believed no longer existed. The boardroom smelled exactly the same. Coffee. Leather chairs. Expensive cologne. Corporate ambition. For one terrifying moment, I forgot to breathe. My father sat at the head of the table. Older. More tired. But still carrying himself like a king. My mother sat beside him reviewing paperwork. Perfect posture. Perfect makeup. Perfect performance. Then my sister walked in. The engagement ring flashed beneath the overhead lights. My ring. Still on her finger. A casual theft worn like an accessory. She didn't even hesitate. Didn't show guilt. Didn't show shame. Just confidence. The confidence of someone who believes the dead stay buried. Charles shook hands. Introductions were exchanged. Everyone smiled. Everyone lied. Corporate meetings are funny that way. People rarely say what they actually mean. When my father said, "We've built something special here," what he meant was, "Please save us." When Charles said, "We're impressed by your growth," what he meant was, "We know you're drowning." And when I quietly took notes at the end of the table, nobody realized the woman recording every word already knew where every skeleton was buried. Then came the moment that nearly exposed me. My mother glanced toward me. Only briefly. 1 second. Maybe less. But her eyes narrowed. A tiny reaction. Instinct. Recognition. The room suddenly felt smaller. I lowered my gaze immediately. Continued typing. Continued breathing. Continued existing. For several long seconds nobody spoke. Then the moment passed. My mother returned her attention to the financial reports. But something had happened. A feeling. A flicker. The human brain notices familiar patterns even when logic says it shouldn't. And for the first time, I wondered whether guilt had begun haunting her. As the meeting continued, my father started discussing my legacy. My legacy. Like I wasn't sitting 10 feet away. Victoria was talented, he said. The room grew quiet. Unfortunately, she often made emotional decisions. I almost laughed. Because it was the opposite of reality. Every major contract. Every expansion. Every profitable acquisition. Had been mine. Yet there he sat, rewriting history in real time. My sister nodded. My brother smirked. And my mother said something I'll never forget. She had potential. Had. Not has. Had. Like I was a failed experiment. A chapter already closed. I kept typing. My hands never stopped moving. But beneath the table my nails dug into my palm so hard they left marks. That night I sat alone in my apartment. The city lights flickered beyond the window. Traffic moved below like glowing rivers. And for the first time since returning, I cried. Not from weakness. Not from grief. From clarity. Because seeing them again removed every remaining illusion. They weren't confused. They weren't mistaken. They weren't victims of circumstance. They knew exactly what they had done. And they had chosen themselves. Every single time. The next morning Charles called. "You okay?" "No." "Good." I laughed despite myself. What kind of answer is that? The honest kind. He paused. Then added quietly. If you weren't hurting, I'd be worried. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he asked. Ready for phase 2? I looked toward the skyline. Toward the company they stole. Toward the family still celebrating their victory. Yes. What do we offer them? I opened a file. The numbers appeared on screen. Loan structure. Collateral requirements. Interest terms. Control provisions. Everything legal. Everything devastating. The trap. A lifeline, I said. Charles laughed softly. The kind they can't refuse? No. I stared at the proposal. The kind they'll beg for. 3 days later, Apex Capital delivered its official rescue package. The largest financial offer Lawson Holdings had received since my death. The board called an emergency meeting. My family celebrated. Champagne appeared. Smiles returned. Hope flooded the building. They thought salvation had arrived. What they didn't know was simple. The contract wasn't designed to save them. It was designed to own them. And hidden deep inside the agreement was the first clause that would eventually transfer their future directly into my hands. The countdown had officially begun. And soon, somebody inside that family was going to realize the ghost they buried never left. If someone betrayed you and later came asking for help, would you save them or let them sign their own downfall? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying Victoria's journey, subscribe and turn on notifications. The first sign wasn't fear. It was curiosity. People imagine guilt arrives like lightning. In reality, it often begins as a small uncomfortable question. A strange feeling. A coincidence that refuses to feel accidental. And once that question enters someone's mind, it starts looking for answers everywhere. My family had just signed Apex Capital's first rescue agreement. The money hit their accounts within 48 hours. Payroll problems disappeared. Suppliers stopped calling. The board relaxed. The crisis seemed over. But I wasn't interested in destroying them financially. Not yet. First, I wanted them to remember. 3 weeks after the funding deal, I arrived early for a board meeting. The executive kitchen was empty. Morning sunlight spilled across polished countertops. For a moment I simply stood there, listening. The soft hum of refrigerators. The distant sound of elevators. The building still felt familiar. Like an old song you haven't heard in years. Then I opened a cabinet. My father's favorite coffee blend. Still there. The exact imported roast he used to order every Christmas. Nobody else in the company drank it. Nobody except him. I prepared a fresh cup and left it in the boardroom before anyone arrived. No note. No explanation. Just the coffee. 10 minutes later, I watched from my seat beside Charles. My father entered. Stopped. Looked at the cup. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Confusion. Then suspicion. He picked it up. Smelled it. Took a sip. For several seconds he simply stared at the table. My mother noticed. What is it? He looked around the room. Nothing. But his voice sounded distant. Like part of him had suddenly stepped backward in time. Because there was only one person who used to prepare that coffee exactly that way. Me. The second clue happened by accident. Or at least that's what everyone believed. My mother hated a particular perfume. Always had. She once claimed it gave her headaches. The scent reminded her of old memories she'd rather forget. Years ago, we argued about it constantly. I wore it anyway. Not because I loved it. Because she hated it. One of those ridiculous mother-daughter battles that seem important when you're young. Now, years later, I wore it again. The same fragrance. The same subtle scent. And during a board meeting, my mother froze mid-sentence. Only for a second. But I saw it. Her eyes shifted toward me. Then away. Then back again. A tiny wrinkle appeared between her brows. Recognition. Memory. Discomfort. The perfume wasn't proof of anything. But it planted another question. And questions are dangerous. Soon the atmosphere began changing. Not publicly. Privately. Small things. Strange things. My father started checking empty hallways before leaving the office. My mother became distracted during meetings. My sister stopped laughing quite as easily. Nobody discussed it openly. But something had entered the room. Something invisible. The possibility that the past wasn't finished with them. Then came the diary. The diary was risky. Possibly the riskiest thing I had done so far. For 2 days I debated whether it was a mistake. Then I remembered my sister wearing my engagement ring. The debate ended. Years earlier, I had filled dozens of journals. Notebooks packed with business ideas, personal fears, future plans. One journal in particular had disappeared shortly after my accident. I always suspected my sister took it. Now I knew she had. Because I found it displayed on a shelf in her office. Like a trophy. Like a souvenir from someone else's life. So one evening, after a company fundraiser, I quietly entered her office while everyone attended a reception downstairs. I took the journal. And left. The following morning, she arrived at work screaming. Not loudly. Not publicly. But enough. Enough for people to notice. Enough for rumors to start. The diary was waiting on her chair. Exactly where she couldn't miss it. No note. No explanation. No fingerprints. Just the journal. Returned. Her assistant later told someone she turned pale the moment she saw it. By lunch, half the building was whispering. By dinner, my sister was drinking heavily. And for the first time, I think she started believing in ghosts. Weeks passed. Pressure continued building. Financial pressure. Emotional pressure. Psychological pressure. Apex Capital's loan terms were beginning to tighten. Performance targets weren't being met. Revenue projections kept falling short. And Ethan's gambling problem was getting worse. Much worse. I learned this during a meeting that changed everything. The boardroom felt tense that afternoon. Storm clouds gathered outside. Rain tapped against the windows. Quarterly numbers flashed across presentation screens. Nobody looked happy. Charles sat calmly at the far end of the table. I remained beside him taking notes. Then Ethan exploded. This isn't working. Silence. My father rubbed his temples. What isn't working? The company. The company isn't the problem. It absolutely is. My mother intervened. Ethan. No. He stood. Chair scraping loudly across the floor. No more pretending. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Ethan made a mistake. A huge one. He mentioned debts. Personal debts. Large debts. The kind nobody else knew existed. I watched my father's face lose color. My mother's expression hardened. And my sister suddenly looked terrified. Because the secret was finally out. The money wasn't disappearing because business was failing. The money was disappearing because Ethan was desperate. And desperate people destroy everything around them. That evening, after the meeting ended, Charles and I reviewed the numbers. The situation was worse than expected. Far worse. Lawson Holdings wasn't months from collapse. It was weeks. Maybe days. I stared at the spreadsheets. Years of work. Years of growth. Being consumed by greed. Charles leaned back. They need another round. I know. They won't survive otherwise. I nodded slowly. Outside, rain streaked across the glass. Inside, another idea formed. Dangerous. Effective. Final. They can have it. Charles looked at me. And the price? I opened a new contract. Then began typing. House. Vacation property. Investment accounts. Vehicles. Private assets. Everything. Collateral. Every piece of security they still possessed. Everything they valued. Everything they thought belonged to them. Soon it would belong to Apex. Soon it would belong to me. The proposal arrived 3 days later. Nobody rejected it. Nobody even tried. Because desperation changes people. The wealthy suddenly become flexible. The powerful become cooperative. And the arrogant become obedient. My family signed preliminary terms within 48 hours. I expected relief. Instead, I felt tired. Because revenge wasn't bringing peace. Only momentum. The train was already moving. And there was no safe way to stop it. Then something happened that I never anticipated. My mother requested a private meeting. Not with Charles. With me. The assistant. The woman she believed was nobody. I entered her office cautiously. She stood near the window overlooking downtown Portland. For several seconds she said nothing. Just watched traffic below. Finally she spoke. You remind me of someone. My heartbeat stumbled. Only once. But enough. I remained calm. Someone from work? No. She turned toward me. And for the first time in months, I saw something beneath her polished exterior. Fear. Real fear. Not corporate anxiety. Not financial stress. Something deeper. I had a daughter. Had. Again. The word landed like ice. I lost her. I said nothing. She studied my face. Searching. Comparing. Wondering. Then she quietly asked. Do you believe people can come back? The room suddenly felt too small. I forced myself to answer carefully. From where? Her eyes lingered on mine. Longer than they should have. Then she looked away. And whispered. That's what keeps me awake. When I left her office, my hands were shaking. Not because I was afraid. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure whether guilt was finally reaching her. Or whether she knew much more than she'd ever admitted. Either way, the countdown was accelerating. The final contract was nearly ready. The estate. The assets. The empire. Everything was about to change hands. And hidden inside my bag was something even more powerful than the contracts. A recording. A conversation captured during one of the earliest board meetings. A conversation my family never realized had been preserved. A conversation about the accident. About insurance. About timing. About me. The moment I listened to it completely, I realized this story was bigger than greed. Much bigger. Because someone in that room knew exactly what happened on that boat. And the truth finally starts coming to the surface. If you discovered your family was hiding a secret about your past, would you keep digging even if the answer could destroy everything? Let me know in the comments. The recording was only 11 minutes long. I listened to it 23 times. The first few listens, I focused on the words. After that, I focused on the silences. Because silence often reveals more than conversation. The recording came from a pen recorder I had carried during the earliest Apex meetings. Most discussions were ordinary. Revenue projections. Debt obligations. Cash flow concerns. Then, near the end of one meeting, people assumed the room was empty. They were wrong. The recorder was still running. My father spoke first. We were lucky. A pause. My brother answered. Luck had nothing to do with it. Another pause. Longer this time. Then my mother quietly said, "We're not discussing this again." Nobody mentioned murder. Nobody confessed to anything criminal. But they discussed timelines, insurance payments, legal filings, the speed of the death certificate, the urgency of asset transfers. And one sentence refused to leave my mind. My sister whispered, "Sometimes I still think she's coming back." The room went silent after that. Not denial. Not laughter. Silence. The kind of silence that sounds like guilt. For several nights I barely slept. Rainstorms rolled across Portland. The city lights blurred beyond my apartment windows. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. Did they cause the accident? Did they simply exploit it? Did they know I survived? Or did greed arrive after they genuinely believed I was gone? The truth mattered. But strangely, it no longer mattered as much as I thought it would. Because regardless of what happened on that boat, the choices afterward belonged entirely to them. Nobody forced them to erase me. Nobody forced them to steal. Nobody forced them to celebrate. Those decisions were theirs. 3 weeks later, Lawson Holdings reached the edge. The company needed one final rescue package. Without it, creditors would begin dismantling everything. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Friday, 10 a.m. Executive conference room. All stakeholders required. I stared at the invitation for a long time. Because I knew exactly what that meeting would become. Not a rescue. Not a negotiation. A resurrection. Friday arrived cold and gray. The kind of morning where the sky looked made of steel. I arrived early. Earlier than everyone else. The boardroom sat empty. 42 floors above the city. The chair at the head of the table waited quietly. My father's chair. The seat he had occupied for years. The seat he believed belonged to him. I stood beside it for several seconds. Then walked away. Not yet. One by one they arrived. My father. My mother. Ethan. My sister. Attorneys. Executives. Consultants. Everyone looked exhausted. The pressure of the previous months had hollowed them out. Dark circles. Forced smiles. Short tempers. People fighting to keep collapsing structures upright. Charles arrived last. Perfectly calm. Perfectly composed. Exactly as planned. The final documents rested neatly in front of every seat. The atmosphere felt strangely hopeful. My family believed salvation was minutes away. The meeting began. Numbers were discussed. Risks were reviewed. Collateral agreements were finalized. Then came the signatures. One by one. Pens moved across paper. Millions of dollars. Properties. Assets. Control rights. Everything transferred exactly according to plan. I watched silently. No satisfaction. No celebration. Only certainty. Because every signature closed another door behind them. And they never noticed. Finally my father leaned back. Relieved. For the first time in months. Thank God. Several people laughed. The tension eased. Champagne appeared. Glasses were poured. My sister actually smiled. Then Charles stood. The room gradually quieted. My father raised his glass. "Mr. Bennett, you've saved this company." Charles smiled politely. Then placed his champagne on the table. "I'm afraid that's not accurate." Confusion spread immediately. What do you mean? Charles adjusted his cufflinks. Calm. Patient. Professional. Then he delivered the line we'd rehearsed dozens of times. The owner of Apex Capital isn't me. Silence. My father's smile faded. My mother froze. Charles turned toward the door. And said, "She's here." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The conference room doors opened. And I walked in. Slowly. Quietly. Without hurry. The same way I had entered dozens of rooms throughout my career. Only this time nobody recognized me as an assistant. Nobody recognized me as an employee. Nobody recognized me as a ghost. At first. Then recognition arrived. One face at a time. My sister went pale first. Then Ethan. Then my mother. My father simply stared. Like his brain had stopped processing information. I crossed the room. Placed a folder on the table. Then removed my identification. My real identification. The one proving I was alive. The one proving Victoria Lawson never legally disappeared. The room remained completely silent. A silence so deep it almost felt physical. Finally my sister whispered. No. Nobody cried. Nobody screamed. Reality doesn't always work that way. Shock often looks much quieter. My father sat motionless. My mother looked like she couldn't find air. Ethan stared at the floor. Only my sister spoke. Repeatedly. No. Over and over. Like repetition could somehow change facts. I looked at all of them. The people who had shared birthdays. Holidays. Family vacations. Years of memories. And I felt something unexpected. Sadness. Not rage. Not triumph. Sadness. Because once upon a time, these people were my home. Then I opened the folder. The recording began playing. 11 minutes. Nobody interrupted. Nobody objected. Nobody denied hearing their own voices. The room listened. Every word. Every pause. Every uncomfortable silence. When it ended, nobody knew where to look. Not at me. Not at each other. Not even at themselves. Finally my father spoke. His voice sounded older than I remembered. What do you want? A simple question. Maybe the simplest question he'd ever asked me. I thought about it carefully. Because months earlier I would have answered differently. Months earlier I would have wanted revenge. Pain. Humiliation. Punishment. Now I wanted something else. The truth. And closure. I wanted my life back. Nobody answered. Because nobody could. That life no longer existed. Not for me. Not for them. Not for anyone. I slid the final documents across the table. Property transfers. Asset agreements. Control structures. Everything legally executed. Everything enforceable. Everything complete. The attorneys reviewed them. Then reviewed them again. Nobody found a flaw. Because there wasn't one. Apex Capital now controlled the estate. The vacation homes. The luxury vehicles. The remaining voting shares. Everything. The empire they stole no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. Legally. Completely. Irrevocably. My sister began crying first. Quiet tears. Not dramatic. Just defeated. Ethan looked physically ill. My mother stared out the windows toward the city skyline. And my father finally understood. Not the money. Not the contracts. The consequences. Because for the first time since my accident, he had absolutely no control. I looked around the room. Then calmly checked my watch. You have 10 minutes. My father blinked. 10 minutes? To gather your personal belongings. Nobody argued. Nobody negotiated. Nobody threatened lawsuits. The fight had already ended. They simply hadn't realized it until now. One by one they stood. One by one they walked toward the door. My sister stopped briefly. Tears filling her eyes. I never thought you'd come back. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman wearing my ring. Living in my house. Borrowing pieces of my life. Then I quietly answered. Neither did you. She lowered her eyes and left. The room gradually emptied. The door closed. Silence returned. For several moments nobody moved. Then Charles smiled. Well. I laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd had in almost a year. Well. He nodded toward the head chair. My father's chair. The chair waiting patiently all morning. Go ahead. I hesitated. Then crossed the room. And sat down. Not because I needed power. Because I needed closure. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls. Cars moved through distant streets. People hurried through ordinary lives. Completely unaware that an entire family empire had just changed hands. I opened the company server. Navigated through archived legal files. And found it. The document. Death certificate. Victoria Lawson. Deceased. I stared at it for several seconds. Then clicked delete. A confirmation box appeared. Are you sure? I smiled. For the first time. Absolutely. I clicked yes. The file disappeared. Gone. Not erased from history. But erased from control. No longer defining me. No longer owning me. No longer true. Epilogue. 6 months later, Lawson Holdings looked different. Smaller. Healthier. Honest. The charity foundation continued operating, but under independent management. Employees kept their jobs. Clients stayed. The company survived. Not because of revenge. Because I refused to become the same kind of person who betrayed me. As for my family, we didn't reconcile overnight. Life isn't that neat. Some wounds heal slowly. Some never fully disappear. But distance accomplished what anger never could. It revealed everyone exactly as they were. Including me. And that turned out to be worth more than every dollar they tried to steal. Because in the end, they took my name. My company. My home. My future. Yet somehow, I was the one who came back alive.